Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt something strange, something you couldn't quite explain? Maybe it was 3:07 a.m. The house was completely silent, and for a brief moment you felt unusually alert, as if your mind had stepped into a different kind of awareness. Your phone sits on the nightstand. The clock glows faintly in the dark. Outside, the streets are empty. Yet inside your mind, something feels intensely alive. Thoughts move differently. Memories appear more vividly. Questions about your life, your job, your relationships, your purpose suddenly surface with unusual clarity. Most people assume moments like this are nothing more than stress. Maybe it's burnout from a demanding job, like the software engineer in Austin who works 60 hours a week and can't seem to shut his brain off at night. Maybe it's financial pressure, the quiet anxiety of wondering if the bills will line up at the end of the month. Or maybe it's the emotional weight of relationships that don't feel quite right anymore. So when people wake up at night, they often think something is wrong with them. They roll over, grab their phone, scroll through social media for a few minutes, and try to force themselves back to sleep. But what if that moment, those strange, quiet minutes when the world is asleep and your mind feels unusually awake, is not a malfunction of your brain at all? What if it is actually a signal that something deeper inside your mind has just activated? Hidden in the center of your brain is a tiny gland, no larger than a grain of rice. For centuries, scientists have studied it, philosophers have speculated about it, and ancient traditions have revered it. It's called the pineal gland. Modern science will tell you it helps regulate sleep through hormones like melatonin. But across cultures, long before neuroscience even existed, many traditions described this same gland as something far more mysterious. They called it the third eye. Not because it literally sees, but because it appears to activate when the mind enters deeper states of awareness, especially at night. And here's the strange part that most people never realize. The hours when many people suddenly wake up, between roughly 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., are exactly when this gland becomes most active. In other words, the moment when you think your mind is betraying you might actually be the moment when your brain is shifting into a completely different mode of perception. Tonight, we're going to explore something that very few people ever stop to question. What really happens inside your brain every night while you sleep? And more importantly, what might your mind be trying to show you when the rest of the world goes quiet? Welcome to the Inner Code, a place where we explore the hidden patterns behind the mind, consciousness, and the deeper forces that shape our lives. If ideas like this spark your curiosity and you enjoy exploring the mysteries of the mind and human awareness, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this channel keep creating thoughtful videos that challenge how we see ourselves and the world around us. Now, before we go deeper, I want to ask you a simple question, one that might reveal more about your own experience than you expect. Think honestly about the last time you woke up in the middle of the night. What did it feel like? A. It felt stressful and overwhelming, like my mind wouldn't stop thinking about problems in my life. B. It felt strangely clear, almost like my mind was trying to show me something important. Comment A or B below. I'm curious to see how many people have experienced this moment of nighttime clarity without realizing what might actually be happening. What makes that moment even stranger is this. The more you try to dismiss it as random, the more it seems to return with quiet precision, as if something inside you has been waiting for the rest of the world to go silent before it begins to speak. Most people are taught to think of the brain as a machine that powers down at night, a biological system cycling through rest, repair, and recovery. But that explanation, while partially true, leaves out something essential about the human experience. Because if the night were only about shutting down, why do some of your most unsettling realizations arrive in darkness? Why do buried emotions rise when the room is still? Why do questions you avoided all day suddenly stand in front of you with nowhere to hide? There is a reason that nighttime does not merely feel different, but seems to open a different interior landscape altogether. And to understand that, we have to begin with a possibility that may sound almost too strange to be real. What if your brain is not simply resting while you sleep, but activating a hidden system that daytime consciousness keeps buried under noise, urgency, and distraction? Deep in the center of the brain, protected from the sensory chaos of the outer world, sits the pineal gland, a tiny structure so physically small that most people would never imagine attaching significance to it. and yet so symbolically loaded that it has fascinated philosophers, mystics, physicians, and seekers for centuries. In modern terms, it helps regulate your sleep-wake cycle by responding to light and darkness, especially through melatonin production. But in human experience, its meaning seems to reach further than chemistry alone. Because darkness does not just change hormones, it changes perception. It softens the grip of the external world. It lowers the volume of social identity. It weakens the constant pull of deadlines, emails, bills, expectations, and performance. During the day, you are busy being someone. You are the employee answering Slack messages, the parent managing schedules, the partner trying to hold a relationship together, the person calculating whether this month's paycheck will stretch far enough. But at night, when all of that begins to recede, a different layer of awareness starts to rise. This is why the night can feel almost confrontational. It removes the background noise that normally protects you from yourself. And when that happens, what surfaces is not always comfortable. It may be grief you postponed, exhaustion you normalized, or the quiet truth that the life you are maintaining on the outside no longer matches what you know on the inside. A man lying awake in a suburb outside Chicago may think he is only worried about a promotion, but beneath that anxiety is a more painful realization that his work has consumed the part of him that once felt alive. A woman in Los Angeles may think she is simply having another sleepless night, but what is really rising is the knowledge that a relationship she keeps trying to save has already emotionally ended. In moments like these, the mind does not invent truth out of nowhere. It reveals what daylight helped you avoid. That is why so many traditions saw the night not as emptiness, but as access. Not because darkness is magical in a theatrical sense, but because it creates conditions in which deeper signals can finally be noticed. The hidden system is not necessarily something supernatural. It is the meeting point between biology and awareness, between the rhythms of the body and the truths the conscious mind keeps delaying. And the real twist is this. The moment you thought was evidence that something was wrong with you may actually be the moment your inner life becomes impossible to ignore. What wakes up at night is not always fear. Sometimes it is perception. Sometimes it is the part of you that still knows when you are living out of alignment. Sometimes it is the mind's last honest voice, speaking only when the world is too quiet to interrupt it. And this is exactly where the idea stops being abstract. Because once you bring it down from philosophy into ordinary life, you begin to see that what happens at night is often woven directly into the pressure, success, and silent exhaustion people carry every single day. Picture a man in his mid-30s living just outside Seattle, the kind of person most people would assume is doing well. He has a respectable tech job, a decent apartment, a gym membership he barely uses, and a salary that looks impressive on paper. His LinkedIn profile suggests progress. His calendar is full. His inbox never sleeps. During the day, he moves fast enough to avoid asking himself whether any of it still feels meaningful. He tells himself he is building something. He tells himself this pace is temporary. He tells himself that once the next promotion comes, once the stock options vest, once the savings account looks safer, he will finally breathe. But night has a way of exposing the stories people use to keep going. At 2:18 a.m., his eyes open for no obvious reason. The room is cold. The city outside is quiet. And for a few minutes, the version of himself he performs during the day disappears. What rises instead is not just anxiety, but clarity. He begins thinking about the meeting he has tomorrow, but underneath that thought is a harder one. He no longer recognizes the person his ambition has turned him into. He thinks about the rent, the credit card balance, the pressure to keep up with friends who seem to be buying homes and building stable lives. But underneath all of that is a deeper ache he rarely lets himself name. He is tired in a way. Sleep does not fix. Not physically tired alone, but inwardly depleted. He has spent so long optimizing his output that he has lost contact with his inner life. And that is what makes these nighttime moments so unsettling. They do not merely interrupt sleep. They interrupt the identity built around performance. Something similar happens to the woman in Chicago who looks successful from the outside, but feels emotionally stranded in her relationship. She and her partner still go to dinner, still split responsibilities, still speak politely, but something vital has gone quiet between them. She tells herself this is adulthood. She tells herself all long-term relationships get less alive. She tells herself she is lucky to have stability in a world this uncertain. Yet almost every night, when the apartment is finally still, she feels a heaviness in her chest that does not fully belong to stress. It feels more like truth pressing upward. Not drama, not panic, just the slow, undeniable recognition that she has been living around her own feelings instead of through them. What these moments reveal is not that life is falling apart, but that a hidden gap has opened between outward function and inward reality. And in American life especially, that gap is easy to normalize. People are praised for endurance. They are rewarded for staying busy. They are taught to equate productivity with worth, emotional control with maturity, and constant striving with purpose. So when the inner self begins to protest, it is often misread as weakness instead of wisdom. But sometimes what wakes you up is not dysfunction. Sometimes it is the cost of living too far away from yourself finally becoming impossible to ignore. That is why these nighttime awakenings can feel strangely personal, almost surgical in the way they cut past excuses. They do not always bring answers. Often they bring exposure. They show you where your life looks solid from the outside, but hollow from within. They reveal the places where money became safety but never became peace, where success became identity but never became fulfillment, where companionship became routine but never became connection. And once that begins to surface, the night is no longer just a biological event. It becomes a mirror, reflecting back the emotional truths daylight helped you postpone. And once the night begins to reflect those hidden truths back to you, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. What is actually happening inside the brain that makes darkness feel like a doorway instead of just the absence of light? From a scientific point of view, the shift begins long before you become aware of it. As evening deepens and light exposure drops, the brain starts responding to that change with remarkable precision. One of the most important players in that transition is the pineal gland, a small structure near the center of the brain that helps regulate your circadian rhythm, the internal 24-hour clock that governs when you feel awake, sleepy, alert, or mentally foggy. During the day, especially under bright light, your brain receives signals that suppress melatonin production, keeping you oriented toward action, focus, and outward engagement. But once darkness increases, that balance begins to change. The pineal gland starts releasing more melatonin into the bloodstream, not to knock you unconscious, but to signal that the body is entering a different mode of operation. This is where people often oversimplify what sleep really is. Sleep is not merely the brain shutting off. It is the brain changing states. Heart rate slows, body temperature slightly drops, muscles relax, and hormone patterns begin to shift. But just as important, your patterns of brain activity also start reorganizing. Electrical rhythms in the brain move through different wave states as you descend from ordinary waking consciousness into deeper stages of rest. In alert daytime activity, the brain is often dominated by faster beta waves, the rhythm associated with problem solving, planning, comparison, and stress. That is the state most Americans live in for too many hours each day, moving from emails to traffic to bills to deadlines without ever really leaving cognitive overdrive. But at night, especially as you approach sleep, the brain begins moving towards slower alpha and theta states, rhythms associated with relaxation, internal imagery, emotional processing, and access to less filtered layers of thought. In other words, the mind does not just become quieter, it becomes differently organized. And that difference matters, because when the brain shifts away from outward survival mode, the inner world becomes easier to perceive. Memory fragments link more freely. Emotional material that was pushed aside during the day becomes more accessible. Subtle associations rise more easily. This is one reason dreams can feel so vivid and why unresolved tension often becomes more noticeable at night. The nervous system is no longer devoting the same amount of energy to managing the outside world, so internal processing becomes more visible. There is also another detail that makes the nighttime brain feel especially strange to people. The boundary between rational control and subconscious material becomes thinner. During the day, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with executive function, self-monitoring, and logical filtering, helps keep experience tightly organized. It decides what is practical, what is relevant, what should be postponed, and what should be ignored. But as you move into sleep and the brain transitions through different cycles, that rigid structure loosens. The result is not irrationality in a dramatic sense, but permeability. Ideas connect more symbolically. Feelings become harder to suppress. Insights can arrive without the usual resistance. That is why a person may lie awake at 2:43 a.m. and suddenly understand something about their career, marriage, or mental exhaustion that seemed unreachable at 2:43 p.m. The brain at night is not necessarily more magical than the brain during the day, but it is less defended, less distracted, and less committed to maintaining the stories that help you function. Science shows us that darkness alters hormones, rhythms, and neural states in ways that genuinely change perception. And once you understand that, the night no longer seems like a random interruption. It begins to look more like a biological threshold, a period when the body quietly guides the mind into a state where deeper material can finally rise to the surface. And once science shows us that the night shifts the brain into a more receptive state, it becomes easier to understand why so many ancient traditions looked at that same window of time and saw not just biology, but a doorway into a deeper layer of human awareness. Long before modern neuroscience gave names to melatonin, circadian rhythm, or changing brainwave patterns, cultures across the world had already noticed that the human mind does not remain the same after dark. They may not have used the language of endocrinology, but they understood, in their own way, that night changes the quality of consciousness. In parts of the East, this change was often described through the symbolism of the third eye, an inner faculty not tied to physical sight, but to intuition, perception, and insight beyond the noise of ordinary thought. In certain yogic and meditative traditions, the center associated with inner vision was not treated as fantasy, but as a metaphor for a different kind of knowing, one that becomes clearer when external stimulation fades. This is what makes the pineal gland so fascinating in the history of human meaning. It sits at the meeting point between the measurable and the symbolic. Anatomically, it is a gland. Culturally, it became a mirror for humanity's oldest suspicion, that the deepest truths are not always found by looking outward, but by becoming still enough to notice what rises from within. Ancient Egyptian imagery, Eastern contemplative systems, mystical branches of philosophy, and later Western esoteric traditions all returned, in different forms, to the same intuition that there is something about inner stillness, darkness, and silence that reveals what daylight conceals. Even if their explanations differed, the pattern is striking. Again and again, human beings associated nighttime consciousness with access, not because the dark itself was worshipped, but because darkness removed distractions and made subtler layers of experience easier to perceive. In that sense, the spiritual reading of the night is not as disconnected from science as modern people sometimes assume. It is simply operating at another level of description. Science explains mechanism. Spiritual language tries to describe meaning. Science can tell you that the brain changes state as the body prepares for sleep. Spiritual traditions ask what kind of truth becomes visible when that change happens. Science observes that the world grows quieter and the nervous system shifts. Spiritual language notices that in this quiet, buried emotions, intuitions, symbols, and inner images often become stronger. The two approaches are not always enemies. Sometimes they are looking at the same event from opposite sides. And this matters because many people in modern American life have been trained to distrust anything that cannot be turned into a metric, a diagnosis, or a performance tool. If a feeling cannot be measured, it gets dismissed. If an experience does not improve productivity, it gets ignored. But not all meaningful experiences arrive as data. Some arrive as a sense that a certain thought matters. Some arrive as an image in a dream that lingers all morning. Some arrive as a sudden knowing that the life you are forcing no longer matches the person you are becoming. Spiritual traditions created language for these moments because they understood something modern culture often forgets. Human beings do not only need explanation. They also need interpretation. They need a way to relate to the invisible parts of life without immediately reducing them to pathology or noise. So when older traditions spoke of the third eye, inner sight, or nighttime awareness, they were not necessarily making a crude scientific claim. They were giving form to a lived reality many people still recognize today, that there are moments, especially in darkness and stillness, when you feel less distracted by the world and more confronted by what is true. And maybe that is why the pineal gland continues to carry such mystery. Not because it proves every spiritual claim people have attached to it, but because it stands as a reminder that the line between body and meaning has never been as simple as we pretend. It is one thing to know that the brain changes at night. It is another thing entirely to realize that those changes may open a space where the hidden parts of the self finally have a chance to be heard. And if that ancient intuition keeps returning across cultures and centuries, then the real question is not whether the night is different, but why it feels so unmistakably different in your own lived experience. During the day, your attention is constantly being claimed by the outside world before you even realize it. Notifications, conversations, deadlines, headlines, traffic, errands, expectations, decisions. Each one pulls a little piece of your awareness outward until your inner world becomes background noise. You may still have feelings, instincts, and quiet doubts beneath the surface, but daylight trains you to override them. There is always one more email to answer, one more meeting to get through, one more task to finish before you allow yourself to feel what you actually feel. By the time evening comes, most people in modern American life are not just physically tired. They are psychically crowded. Their minds are so saturated with input that they can no longer tell the difference between what they truly sense and what they have merely absorbed. That is why the night can feel so strangely intimate. It does not necessarily add something new to your consciousness. It removes what has been drowning it out. As the world quiets, the social self begins to loosen its grip. The version of you that has been performing competence, managing impressions, staying polite, staying useful, staying productive, no longer has the same amount of fuel behind it. The ego, not in the dramatic sense of arrogance, but in the deeper sense of the identity structure you use to function in the world, begins to soften. And when that happens, something subtle but powerful takes place. You stop hearing only the loudest layers of your mind. You begin to hear the deeper ones. This is why nighttime thoughts often feel different from daytime thoughts. They do not move with the same sharp, managerial quality. They feel slower, more symbolic, sometimes more honest, and often more emotionally revealing. A memory you did not expect returns. A dream lingers with unusual weight. A small feeling you dismissed at noon becomes impossible to ignore at 2 a.m. And what makes this so unsettling is that night strips away many of the buffers that normally help you stay defended. In daylight, your role can protect you from your truth. You can hide inside your routine, your ambition, your responsibilities, even your stress. But darkness takes away some of that scaffolding. It places you in a space where there is less to do, less to prove, and less to distract yourself with. That is why the subconscious often feels closer at night. Not because it suddenly appears from nowhere, but because your ordinary defenses are no longer as loud. The subconscious is always there, carrying unfinished emotional material, buried associations, unresolved fears, silent desires, and intuitions your daytime mind has not fully accepted. But at night, when the noise floor drops, its signals become easier to detect. This is also why dreams can feel more vivid than logic would suggest. They are not simply random images. They often carry the emotional tone of what the conscious mind has left unprocessed. And intuition, too, can seem stronger at night for the same reason. Intuition is not always a mystical voice arriving from outside you. Sometimes it is simply perception freed from distraction. It is your deeper pattern recognition becoming audible once the surface chatter calms down. The strange beauty of the night is that it creates conditions in which truth does not have to compete so hard to be heard. What you sense then may not always be comfortable, and it may not always be clear right away, but it often carries a different kind of sincerity. In the silence, you are no longer just reacting to life. You are closer to perceiving it. And that may be why so many people secretly fear the night even as they are drawn to it. Because somewhere deep down they know that when the noise recedes, they may finally come face to face with what they have been unable to hear all day. And when that quieter layer of awareness becomes easier to hear, one of the first places it often begins to speak with unsettling honesty is in the relationships we keep trying to explain away in daylight. There are people who can manage pressure at work, keep a clean calendar, pay their bills on time, smile through dinner plans, and still feel a kind of loneliness that no amount of busyness can hide once the lights go out. Think of a woman in her late 30s living in Denver, someone responsible, capable, admired by the people around her. She has built a life that looks stable from the outside. She works a solid corporate job, remembers birthdays, answers texts, shows up for people, and keeps telling herself she should feel grateful because, by most standards, she has done everything right. But every night, sometime after midnight, a quiet heaviness begins to rise in her chest. It is not dramatic enough to call a crisis. It is not loud enough to interrupt the image of a functioning life. It is just persistent. She lies beside someone who technically shares her life, and yet the silence between them feels thicker than words. They still talk about groceries, schedules, family obligations, streaming shows, weekend plans. They still move like a team on the surface. But something more essential has slowly gone missing, and the night is when she can no longer pretend she does not feel it. During the day, she can call it stress. She can blame her fatigue, her workload, the cost of living, the pace of life, the fact that everyone seems stretched too thin these days. But at night, when the world stops demanding her performance, another truth starts to form. She is not only tired. She is emotionally underfed. She is not only overwhelmed. She is disconnected. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because burnout is not always caused by doing too much. Sometimes it comes from staying too long in spaces where your spirit no longer feels met. This is why certain relationships become louder in silence. Not louder through conflict, but louder through absence. You begin to feel what is no longer there. The warmth that became politeness. The intimacy that became routine. The sense of being seen that became logistics. And what makes this especially painful in American culture is that people are often taught to measure relationship health by external markers. Are you still together? Are you both responsible? Are you paying the mortgage, splitting the bills, posting the holiday photos, making it work? But the inner life does not measure love that way. The inner life measures aliveness. It notices whether your body relaxes or tightens around someone. It notices whether your truth expands or contracts in their presence. It notices whether you feel emotionally safer or merely more accustomed. And at night, when the usual distractions fall away, those signals become much harder to silence. The pineal gland may be part of the biological transition into nighttime awareness, but what that awareness often reveals is deeply personal. It may show you that what you have been calling stability is actually numbness. It may show you that the relationship you keep protecting out of loyalty is also the place where parts of you have gone quiet. It may show you that you are not asking for too much from life or from love, but that you have simply adapted to too little for too long. And that is why nighttime clarity can feel almost shocking. It does not always tell you what to do next, but it tells you what you can no longer honestly deny. If this part of the video feels familiar, comment this affirmation below. I honor the truth I feel in silence. And once you realize that the night may be revealing something real instead of merely disturbing your sleep, the most important question is no longer what you are feeling, but what you do the moment that feeling arrives. This is where most people unknowingly shut the door on the very insight they have been longing for. They wake up, feel that wave of alertness, unease, or strange clarity, and instantly reach for the quickest escape. The phone lights up the room. Social media floods the mind with borrowed emotion. News headlines pull attention back into fear. Messages, sports scores, emails, shopping feeds, and endless scrolling drag consciousness back into the daytime. World before the deeper signal has had a chance to form into language. In a culture trained to avoid stillness, distraction becomes almost automatic. The moment silence starts to reveal something uncomfortable, people interrupt it. They do not mean to betray themselves. They have just been conditioned to treat inner signals as problems to suppress instead of messages to witness. That is why so many people keep missing what the night is trying to show them. They do not stay with the moment long enough. They sedate it with stimulation. They overpower it with content. They turn a potentially meaningful opening into one more cycle of avoidance. But if you want to understand what your nighttime awareness is actually trying to reveal, the first shift is simple. Do not immediately consume. Observe first. Before you check the time a second time, before you unlock your screen, before you decide whether the feeling is stress, intuition, sadness, or nothing at all, Create a small pause between the experience and your habit. That pause is where awareness begins. A simple protocol can help, especially because the night does not ask for a dramatic ritual. It asks for receptivity. If you wake up in the middle of the night, begin with step 1. Stay still for a few breaths and keep the room as dark as possible. Let your body know there is no emergency. Do not force meaning. Just notice what feels most present. Is it pressure in the chest, mental racing, emotional heaviness, unusual clarity, a dream fragment, a specific person, a decision you have been avoiding? Step 2. Place one hand on your chest or stomach and silently ask, what is rising in me right now? This is not about hearing a mystical voice. It is about giving your deeper mind a chance to surface before your habits bury it again. Step 3. If something feels clear enough, write one sentence only. Not a full journal entry, not a performance, just one honest sentence on your phone's notes app in dark mode or on a small notepad beside the bed. It might be something like, I am more exhausted than I admit, or I already know this relationship has changed, or I do not want this version of success anymore. Step 4. Take one slow breath in for 4 seconds and exhale for 6, repeating that 3 times. This tells the nervous system that truth does not have to feel like danger. Step 5. Do not solve your life at 3 a.m. That is where many people go wrong. The goal is not to make huge decisions in the dark. The goal is to collect what the dark reveals and return to it in daylight with honesty. This matters because the night is often accurate, but it is not always complete. It gives you raw material, not always final conclusions. Over time, this simple practice changes your relationship with yourself. You stop treating your inner life as an interruption. You start treating it as intelligence. And that may be the real hidden knowledge most people never learn. Sometimes the pineal gland is not just helping your body move through sleep, but helping your awareness enter a quieter threshold where truth can finally reach you before the noise of the world returns. And if you practice meeting the night with awareness instead of escape, something begins to change that reaches far beyond sleep itself. You start to understand that what happens in darkness is not separate from the life you are building in daylight, but quietly connected to every choice, every relationship, every ambition, and every version of yourself you keep becoming. This may be the deepest lesson hidden inside the mystery of the pineal gland and nighttime awareness. The body does not simply put you to sleep each night. It creates a threshold where your inner life has a chance to catch up with the pace of your outer life. And for many people, that is the real crisis of modern living. It is not only that they are busy, overworked, overstimulated, and emotionally exhausted. It is that their inner world has fallen behind their calendar. Their soul, if you want to call it that, has not been given enough silence to speak. Their deeper intelligence has not been given enough stillness to organize what they truly feel. So they keep moving, achieving, earning, responding, maintaining, producing, showing up, and performing, while something quieter and more honest waits until the middle of the night to finally be noticed. This is why the lesson here is bigger than sleep hygiene, bigger than stress, and even bigger than whether you see the pineal gland as purely biological or deeply symbolic. The real lesson is that human beings cannot remain inwardly divided forever, without paying a price. If your outer life keeps moving in one direction while your inner truth keeps pulling in another, eventually the tension will show up somewhere. It may show up as restlessness, numbness, chronic dissatisfaction, emotional flatness, decision fatigue, or the strange ache of succeeding at a life that no longer feels like yours. And what the night offers, when you stop fighting it for a moment, is not punishment. It offers feedback. It offers a mirror. It offers a quiet but unmistakable reminder that truth does not disappear just because you delay listening to it. In that sense, nighttime awareness is not there to make you afraid of your own mind. It is there to teach you how to return to yourself before disconnection becomes your normal. The deeper wisdom to take from this is simple, but not easy. Stop treating your inner signals like interruptions and start treating them like intelligence. If something keeps surfacing at night, do not immediately label it weakness, anxiety, or random noise. Ask what pattern it belongs to. Ask what part of your life it touches. Ask whether it points to exhaustion, misalignment, grief, loneliness, or a truth you already know but have not yet admitted in daylight. The goal is not to romanticize every sleepless moment or turn every midnight thought into destiny. The goal is to become more honest, more observant, and more willing to see that your life is always speaking to you through the body, through the mind, through emotion, through silence, and sometimes through the strange clarity that only appears when the world goes dark. Applying this to your life right now can begin in very practical ways. If you have been waking up at night with pressure around money, do not just ask how to make more. Also ask what fear has been running your relationship with security. If your mind keeps circling around your job, do not only ask whether you can endure another quarter or another year. Ask whether the version of success you are chasing still matches the person you are becoming. If thoughts about a relationship rise in the dark, do not only ask whether you can keep it functioning. Ask whether your heart still feels alive inside it. And if what comes up is burnout, do not reduce that word to being tired. Burnout is often the soul's way of saying that the life structure around you is demanding more energy than your truth can keep giving without consequence. This is why the real application is not just sleeping better. It is living more congruently. It is making small daylight decisions that honor what nighttime awareness keeps revealing. That may mean creating 10 minutes of silence before bed instead of ending the day inside a screen. It may mean writing down one recurring truth and finally acting on it in a calm, grounded way. It may mean admitting that your body has been wiser than your excuses. It may mean recognizing that peace does not come from controlling every circumstance, but from reducing the distance between what you know inside and how you actually live outside. In the end, maybe the pineal gland matters so much in human imagination because it sits at the edge of one of life's deepest realizations. When external noise fades, inner truth becomes harder to outrun. And perhaps that is not something to fear. Perhaps it is grace. Perhaps every night is a quiet invitation to come back into alignment before another day begins. Before we close, I'd love to hear your perspective. When you wake up in the middle of the night, what usually comes up first for you? Stress about life or clarity about what needs to change? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can learn from each other's experience. And if this video spoke to something real in you, please subscribe to the Inner Code to support the channel and give us the motivation to keep creating deeper and more meaningful content ahead.